Freddy Krueger's Tales of Terror. Fatal Games by Bruce Richards. Chapter 26. Chip turned away, sickened by the sight. For a moment he thought he might hurl. His arms went limp and his biology book slipped out of his hands. It bumped down the stairs and struck Barney in the face. Barney moaned. He wasn't dead. Chip gripped the stair railing tightly and fought the wave of nausea sweeping over him. When he had caught his breath, he turned his head and looked down the stairs. But the sight of Barney sprawled out on the hard concrete, blood gushing from his mouth, several of his teeth out, lying on the front of his shirt, an ugly gash above his eye where he had hit the edge of the stairs, brought on another wave of nausea. Another sickening thought gripped Chip. Barney looked just like Scott must have looked after his car accident. Everyone stood frozen as if in a bad dream. One of the girls had fainted, and her friend was gently holding her head. Then the pack stirred to life, and someone ran for help. Barney groaned in pain and tried to push himself up into a sitting position. Chip was at his side, helping him. "Who pushed me?" Barney's glazed eyes slowly began to focus on Chip. Why'd you push me?" Barney asked through bloody lips. "Huh?" Chip couldn't believe what he was hearing. "You called my name. I turned around. You pushed me." Barney's voice trailed off. More blood streamed from his mouth onto Chip's light blue sweater. A murmur went through the mob. "What happened?" a kid asked as he arrived on the scene. "That new kid pushed Barney Peters down the stairs," someone answered. Chip's face turned pale as he looked about him, looked at the crowd staring back at him with accusing eyes, hate-filled eyes. He wanted to say something, to defend himself, to shout out his innocence, but his tongue was tied in a big, useless knot. He looked down at Barney, whose eyes were glazing over again. "Barney, that's not what happened," Chip said, gently shaking the boy. Tell them. Barney passed out. Chip looked back up at the accusing stares of the crowd. "The new guy pushed Barney down the stairs," someone shouted louder. "Who?" "Chip Parker," Charlie Chadwick said, stepping out of the crowd. Looming above Chip, his hands balled into fists at his side. The mob began to form around him. "No, I didn't do it," Chip stammered. It was an accident." The eyes that looked back at him didn't believe him. "Did someone call 911? Chip shouted, fighting back the panic he felt rising inside. No one answered. The crowd clustered around him. "Someone call 911! He needs an ambulance!" Chip repeated, more urgently, his voice growing shrill. "And get a teacher!" "What's going on?" asked a girl. "It's the kid who moved into Evan Walker's old house," came another voice from the crowd. "His name's Chip Parker." "Who?" someone else asked. "The kid living in the haunted house. He pushed Barney Peters down the stairs." "I didn't push him!" Chip exclaimed, trying to quell the panic rising in his voice. He fell. It was an accident, I swear. The guy just fell." "Barney saw you do it, dude," Charlie said menacingly. "I heard him say so." "I saw him do it too," came a voice out of the crowd. Chip angrily shot his head in the direction of the voice to spot the liar. He caught a brief glance of someone wearing a hood. The bell rang shrilly, echoing up and down the staircase. But still nobody moved. Then the crowd suddenly parted as a teacher appeared. "What happened?" asked a big barrel-chested man. He was wearing a tight brown suit. "He fell," Chip told the teacher. "He was pushed," someone countered. "Did anyone call 911? the teacher asked. "I think someone did already, Mr. Kazak," came a voice from the back. "All right, everyone," Mr. Kazak barked. "Get to your classes, now. Showtime is over." The crowd broke up slowly, muttering, grumbling. In the distance, Chip heard the wail of a siren. After his last class, Chip walked over to the football field with mixed feelings. Tryouts didn't seem so important to him anymore. Barney had been hurt, and everyone thought he was responsible. His first day of school, and already everyone thought he had viciously pushed a kid down the stairs. Even worse, when the students found out where he lived, in weird Evan Walker's house on Elm Street, they just shrugged as if to say, well, what can you expect from someone who would live there? Chip felt everyone's eyes on him in the hallway after school. Everywhere he looked, someone had an accusing glance or a curious stare. The after-school crowd had parted as if he was radioactive or something, and they didn't want to be contaminated. And it wasn't any different as he jogged across the field. Most of the Springwood Owls were spread out on the field doing muscle-stretching exercises and chatting. But the jabbering came to an abrupt halt when they spotted him. Chip felt their eyes on him as he loped across the field with his equipment bag slung over his shoulder. Chip spotted Boomer in his wheelchair near the sideline. He had a clipboard in one hand and was jotting something down. Team Manager was printed in big block letters on his gray sweatshirt. Standing next to Boomer was an older man in a baseball cap with a large owl on the front. A gray and green sweatshirt stretched over his fat gut, and a shiny whistle dangled from around his neck. Chip guessed the man must be Coach Cutler. Cutler was yelling at someone wearing a hooded sweatshirt. Must be Al, Chip figured. Leave it to his brother to piss off the coach the first time they met. Chip caught snatches of the conversation as he approached them. Look, Parker, I told you before, Cutler said. We don't play a wishbone offense at Springwood. Our quarterbacks pass. They don't run. I'm only asking for a chance, Al protested. I've got you penciled in at free safety, Cutler said in a firm voice. So you're not even going to give me a chance? Al griped. Yeah, I'll give you a chance, Cutler said, when I'm out of quarterbacks. Cutler beamed when he saw Chip. Now, here's a kid who can play quarterback. Cutler slapped Chip on the back. That was a hell of a game you played against us last year. Too bad your defense couldn't hold that lead. Thank you, sir, Chip said gratefully. It was the first nice thing anyone had said to him all day. He just wished he hadn't said it in front of Al. Chip glanced at Al, who was looking back at him darkly. A breeze gusted up and blew back the blanket that covered Boomer's legs. When they had first met at his locker, Chip thought Boomer had no legs. Now Chip saw that Boomer did have legs, but what was left of them resembled two shriveled French fries. It was as if they had been crushed flat and useless. Coach Cutler gestured to Boomer. This is my team manager, Boomer Harrison. Chip nodded. We've met. Like I said, you played well against us last year, Coach Cutler said. I just hope you do as well in the tryout. We need some fresh meat on this team, especially since Martin dropped out of school. The coach got a faraway look in his eyes. Best goddamn quarterback I ever had. Coach, Al interrupted. I just wanted to remind you that Middleton beat you guys 2 years ago when I played quarterback for them. I remember, Cutler said, frowning. We had one of the worst teams I ever coached that year. That was the year before Martin became the starter. I just wanted to remind you that quarterback is my number one position, Al said. Cutler let out an exasperated breath. Thank you, I'll keep that in mind, he muttered, jotting something down on his clipboard. I'm just asking for a fair chance, Al whined. Look, Parker, I only have room on my roster for 2 quarterbacks, Cutler said. A starter and a backup, and I've got 2 of them. So if you don't beat out one of them... Peters is hurt, Coach, Boomer said, erasing something on his clipboard. What? Cutler asked, his jaw dropping. Fell down some stairs or something? Boomer said.
glancing at Chip. Was Boomer accusing him like everyone else? A look of disgust creased Cutler's face. He slammed his clipboard to the ground. "What next?" he muttered loudly. Cutler said nothing for a few moments, just shook his head in dismay. Then he shot a glance at Chip and Al. "You two, get your pads on." He nodded in the direction of the stadium locker room entrance, which was right across the cinder track. "You can use my empty locker for now," Boomer added. "And hustle," Cutler said, brushing some grass off his clipboard. Chip picked up his gear, then he and Al jogged to the locker room. They found 2 empty lockers and quickly changed into cleats and pads. "What happened to Peters?" Al asked. "He fell down some stairs," Chip said, tight-lipped. "But he thinks someone pushed him." "No kidding," Al said. Chip thought he saw Al briefly smirk. "So, who pushed him? Did he say?" "Yeah," Chip muttered, trying not to recall the bloody mess that had once been Barney Peters' face. "He thinks I did it." Al laughed out loud. Chip glared at him. "Why are you laughing?" Al shrugged. "I don't know, I just think it's funny he would accuse you." Al laced up his cleats. "So did you do it?" Chip stared at his brother in disbelief. "What? Push Peters down the stairs?" "Yeah," Al said calmly. "Of course not. Why would I do that?" "Maybe being near to Daddy's spirit is getting to you," Al said with a devilish grin. Chip knew Al was playing mind games with him, trying to distract him from the tryout so he would win the quarterback position. Al slipped a thick forearm pad on and wrapped tape around it to hold it in place. Then he slammed his forearm into the metal locker door with such force the whole row shook. A big dent was left in the locker where Al had just smashed it. Chip had a flashback of his first dream the night he moved into the house on Elm Street, when someone in a hood had smashed him in the face just like that. He had thought it was Al in the dream, but Al wouldn't hurt him like that. Even during their worst fights, Al held back. At least he always had in the past, before they moved into the house on Elm Street. "That should do," Al said with a pleased expression, inspecting the dent in the locker door. His gaze shifted to Chip. His pale blue eyes seemed paler than ever. "Should do just fine," he said ominously, slipping on the other forearm pad and taping it into place. Chapter 27. Al slipped his black mouthpiece in and grinned luridly at Chip. Al wore a black mouthpiece instead of a white one to intimidate his opponents. Al's pale blue eyes were glowing fervently now, which spelled trouble for someone. Probably that freshman quarterback Roger the Dodger. Roger had better live up to his name, Chip thought. Al would kill to play quarterback. Chip was still lacing up his cleats when Al left the locker room. He didn't wait for Chip. Not that Chip cared much one way or the other. Chip smoothed back his tasseled brown hair as best he could, slipped on his helmet, and followed Al out to the playing field. Cutler was running the team through drills. Fortunately, it was a warm afternoon, and Chip felt his arm loosen up as he started to toss the ball back and forth with Al. Chip looked up when he saw Boomer wheeling toward him. "Cutler wants to take a look at you," Boomer told Chip. "The receivers are going to run some simple slant patterns so he can check out your timing." Chip nodded. To Al, Boomer said, "Take the free safety position." "What about the quarterback position?" Al asked, scowling. "What about it?" Boomer asked. He had overheard Al arguing with Coach Cutler. "Am I going to get a shot or what?" "Take it up with Cutler, not me," Boomer said, wheeling away. "Legless gimp," Chip heard Al mutter. The whistle blew shrilly. "Let's go, Parkers!" Coach Cutler shouted over to them, waving them in. Al snapped his chin strap on as the brothers jogged out onto the field. "Keep your head up out there," Al snarled at Chip, "if you want to keep it at all." "Keep it clean, bro," Chip warned as Al joined the defensive huddle. Like it's my fault the coach won't let him play quarterback, Chip thought. Chip joined the offensive huddle. His heart was racing, but he knew once he started to play, all the distractions would just fade away. That was the way it always was when he played football. "Hey man, we know why you messed Barney up," one of the guys in the huddle suddenly snarled at Chip as he was calling the play in the huddle. "Tell him, Sam," someone else said. Uh-oh, Chip thought to himself, this wasn't a good start. "What happened to Barney was an accident," Chip said. He looked each player in the eyes, a challenging look. "I've got a job to do now, so why don't you just do yours? If anyone has a problem with what happened to Barney, meet me after practice. We'll settle it then." Chip clapped his hands and broke the huddle before the players could respond. The entire team would probably kick his butt after practice, but what else could he do? His job as quarterback was to run the team, and he wouldn't be able to do that if he didn't establish his leadership. On the line of scrimmage, Chip checked out the defense. He made brief eye contact with his receiver, barked out the call, and the ball was hiked. Suddenly, 22 football players sprang into action. Chip took 3 quick steps back, patted the ball with his free hand to tighten his grip, and picked up his man as he made his cut near the sideline. His receiver was too close to the sideline. Chip realized he shouldn't be over that far. He was throwing the timing completely off. A second later, it became irrelevant as Al came over to double up on the receiver, colliding with him, sending the receiver out of bounds and making him ineligible. Al must have overheard Boomer telling him to run a slant pattern and anticipated it, effectively screwing up the entire play. But his receiver shouldn't have been that close to the sideline anyway, Chip thought angrily. He automatically looked for his secondary receiver. He had to scramble as his pocket collapsed on him. His offensive lineman appeared to be making only a half-hearted effort to keep out the rampaging defensive players. Chip quickly scanned the field, but all of his remaining receivers were covered, and they didn't seem to be trying very hard to get open. As Chip debated what to do, in the split second, a body came flying over the top of his protection, momentarily blotting out the sun. Chip caught a glimpse of the forearm that smashed him in the face, propelling him violently to the hard turf, smashing his head into the ground. Tiny stars danced around inside his brain. Then the stars faded, and Chip tried to open his eyes. It took a lot of effort, and he found himself staring up at a round golden sun in a clear blue sky. He tried to struggle to his feet, but wooziness forced him back down. Groggy and disoriented, Chip felt as if his brain had become dislodged inside his head. Then he looked up as a black form blotted out the sun again. It was the hooded figure from his dream. Chip blinked his eyes, trying to blink away the menacing figure. When his eyes refocused, he saw Al standing over him, unsnapping his chin strap, a big smirk on his face. Then everything went black. Chip smelled curry powder. The sharp aroma filled his nostrils. He opened his eyes and sat up with a painful groan. His body pushed into the soft cushions of the living room couch. He was home, though he couldn't remember how he had gotten there. His head was pounding. His vision was still blurry, and his cheek felt as if it had swollen up. He vaguely remembered getting hurt on the football field. He hoped his cheekbone wasn't broken. He wondered if he had been taken to the hospital. He was having trouble thinking straight, remembering what had happened. The room swam briefly before his eyes. He saw a hazy figure standing in the kitchen archway, wearing a hood, holding a knife. Chip gasped. The hooded figure was rapidly crossing the room now, coming for him. It had on a cape. A cape? Chip couldn't make sense of what was happening. He struggled to his feet, but as he rose from the couch, dizziness sent him crashing back down again. The deep cushions seemed to swallow him up. If I don't move, I'll die, Chip thought, as a rush of adrenaline gave him new strength. Panic-stricken, he flailed his hands as he attempted to rise again. "What's wrong, sweetheart?" At the sound of his mother's voice, Chip stopped flailing. His vision cleared and he saw his mother. She was wearing a loose, flowery dress. She held a long wooden spoon in one hand, which Chip had thought was a knife. Chip laughed with relief. His cheerful, pretty, eternally optimistic mother smiled brightly at him. "What are you laughing at?" "Nothing," Chip said, trying to smile. But his smile quickly turned into a taut expression of pain and anguish as his head began to throb. "What happened?" his mother asked. Her bright expression was replaced with one of worry, and she sat down next to him on the couch. "There's a big welt on your cheek." Through the whirring in his head, Chip heard someone grunt in the basement. Al pumping iron. Then he remembered. Al had put his lights out. Chip struggled to sit up. I think Al hit me," Chip started to say, before the room tilted at an odd angle, and he had to lie back down again. When his head cleared, he saw his mother at the top of the basement stairs. "Al, get up here!" she shouted down the stairs in a stern voice. "No, Mom!" Chip heard one last loud grunt and then the clunk of heavy metal striking the basement floor. Then he saw his mother step back as a sweating, hooded Al trudged up the last few steps. Al stood before their mother, easily dwarfing her, and stared down at her with a blank, almost laconic expression on his face. "How many times have I told you not to fight with your brother?" His mother immediately began to shout. "Fight?" Al asked, glancing malevolently at Chip. "It wasn't like that, Mom," Chip yelled from the couch, more throbbing, more pain in his head. "It was in a game." His mother glanced over at him. "A football game?" "Yeah. He got his bell rung in the tryout, and Coach Cutler told me to take him home," Al told his mother in a surly voice. "We weren't fighting." Al leaned against the kitchen wall and wiped sweat from his face with the sleeve of his sweatshirt. He looked over at Chip. "We've got another tryout tomorrow if you think you can handle it, wimp." He shook his head in disgust. "One play and you get yourself knocked out, and I've got to take you home? Nice going, jerk. You played like a pansy out there. Maybe you should give up football and help your mother make donuts." "You knocked your brother out?" Mrs. Parker asked incredulously. "Who says I did it?" Al asked, his face growing dark with anger. Mrs. Parker glanced at Chip. "Did he do it?" Chip was hesitant. "I thought you did it," he said to Al. "Did you?" Mrs. Parker broke in before Al could answer. "How many times have you brought him home looking like this?" she asked, glaring at Al. "Banged up and bruised, and cut and bleeding. How many times?" His mother's voice had become shrill, rising with her anger. Al didn't reply. He just looked past his mother with a 1,000-mile stare. "How many times have you brought your brother back looking like this? I'm asking you a question, young man. I want an answer," she persisted. "Am I supposed to keep count or something?" Al asked flippantly. "It's not my fault he's a wimp, and he's not my brother." Al brushed past his mother and went into the kitchen, opened the fridge, and took out a jug of orange juice. He uncapped the jug and took a big swig. Some of the juice slopped down his chin. Al didn't bother to wipe it away. "And how many times have I told you not to do that?" his mother yelled at Al. "Do what?" Al asked in an exasperated tone, taking another big drink, gulping noisily. "Drink from the jug, leaving your germs everywhere. What if someone else wants some orange juice?" Then I guess Chippy Poo will just have to get my germs, Al said. He took another big gulp, his eyes fixed on his mother in a bored expression. Mrs. Parker glowered at Al, but Al just gulped down more juice. You know something, Al, Mrs. Parker said. I'm fed up with your attitude. Mom, Chip gave his mother an imploring look. He hated it when his mother and Al fought, which they did more than ever since his dad had died. Come on, forget it. It's no big deal. It's football. If your father was here, Mrs. Parker began to say. If he was here, he wouldn't do nothing. He was a broke-down loser, Al said. Mrs. Parker's eyes were wide with fury, but she was speechless. And he wasn't my father, Al went on, any more than Chip's my brother. He probably wasn't even Chip's father from what I hear. Mrs. Parker's mouth gaped open. What? Al took another swig of juice and belched loudly. I've been hearing plenty of stories about who you had an affair with when you lived in Springwood, when you were a teenager, just before you got married. I know who Chip's real dad is. Al's eyes had an odd gleam to them. What are you talking about? She asked in exasperation. What affair? An affair with you know who, Al said, his eyes growing wide. I know who Chip's real father is. I have no idea what you're talking about, Mrs. Parker said, shaking her head at Al. Let me smell your breath. What? Al asked. Have you been drinking beer? No. Where did you come up with this outlandish story? I heard some stuff from a guy who's lived here all his life, Al said. Some stuff he says his parents told him. He says you were doing it with... Hey, Al, cool it, okay? Chip warned his brother. That's a lot of bull and you know it. It's okay to kid around with me about it, but it isn't funny with Mom. My friend says he knew who my real dad was too, Al went on, ignoring his brother. He says he was a fireman or something, died in the fire. It's just too bad he's dead now because I was dying to meet him. Mrs. Parker fixed Al with a steady gaze. Al didn't look her in the eyes. He just drank more juice from the jug and stared out the kitchen window, stared at a big flying bug that kept bashing itself against the glass. You know you need my permission to play football, Mrs. Parker finally said, pointing a sharp fingernail in Al's face. For a brief moment, Chip was afraid Al might snap his mother's fingertip off. I can always talk to the principal and have you taken off the team, she continued. So you just keep running off that smart mouth of yours and see if I don't. She jabbed her finger in Al's chest for emphasis. Al didn't flinch, though the fingernail must have hurt. If anything, he seemed to enjoy the pain. If you don't want to obey the rules of the house, which are my rules, then you can just leave. Just get out! Get out! Al snorted. Big loss that would be, a dump like this. Can we all just lighten up a bit? Chip pleaded. He rose from the couch, but had to steady himself on an armrest as a wave of dizziness swept over him. His mother ignored him. Go find a job and a place of your own to live. She was screaming now, her voice several octaves higher than Chip had ever heard it before. Chip shrugged helplessly. He had had enough. He pulled himself from the couch and headed for the front door, as his mother and Al continued arguing, batting angry words back and forth like ping-pong balls. Chip stepped out of the house and gently closed the door behind him. He sat on the front steps and stared out into the starry night. He hoped that after a few more days this old house would seem more like home to him. A light blue Honda Civic cruised by. Scott looked out the driver's window at Chip. Then he roared away up the street. A cool breeze tossed dead leaves about the front yard. Chip looked up and down Elm Street. At night there were no signs of life, not even a stray cat. It seemed like all the neighbors kept their curtains drawn, their windows down, their doors locked. He rose to his feet and out of curiosity made his way around to the backyard. He hadn't been back there since they'd moved in. As he passed the kitchen window, he could still hear his mother and Al going at it, louder than ever. World War III in full swing. Chip stood at the edge of the backyard. It was totally overgrown, macabre even, in the square yellow light cast from the big back kitchen window. At the far end of the backyard, there was a white picket fence and dark woods beyond that. The rest of the yard was bordered by scraggly hedges that poked wildly in all directions. The grass hadn't been mowed in months, and tall weeds grew everywhere. In one corner of the yard, just beyond the reach of the kitchen light, Chip saw what looked like a small clearing. A garden, maybe. He decided to check it out. Dead leaves crackled beneath Chip's sneakers as he walked over to the clearing. This corner of the yard was neat and trim, the grass as smooth as a golf course putting green. There were many patches of dirt, laid out in a neat and orderly fashion. Chip wondered what they were. In a way, it reminded him of a miniature graveyard. Then something caught Chip's eyes. It looked like a tiny arm poking out from beneath a fresh patch of dirt. Afraid of what he might find, but too curious to ignore it, Chip picked a small, dead tree limb off the ground and poked the clump of dirt away. Chip shivered at the sight of the thing. Some kind of weird doll, but with its internal organs showing. Bizarre, Chip thought, and totally repulsive. It even had hair. Chip kicked some dirt back over the thing. He didn't want to look at it. Something about the doll reminded him of someone, but he couldn't put his finger on it. He kicked more dirt over the doll, covering the bits of fuzzy auburn hair on its head. Then more and more dirt caught up in a frenzy, his foot powered by some out-of-control force. Something snagged Chip's foot, and he felt his knee snap. He tried to tug his foot free, but it only became more entangled in the vine-like thing that was trying to wrap itself around his entire leg. Panicked, he struggled frantically as the vine wrapped around his waist. He lost his balance and fell to the ground. A shadow fell over him. Chip looked up and saw a hooded figure by a hole in the hedge at the end of the yard. Something glinted in the dim light. A switchblade. "Help!" Chip yelled, hoping Al or his mother would hear him over their arguing. "Help!" he yelled again as the hooded figure loped across the yard, headed straight toward him. Chapter 28. "Are you all right?" said a raspy voice. "Let me give you a hand." Chip held out his hand, and a sandpapery palm pulled him to his feet. The weeds that had trapped him fell away as if their job was done. Chip was face to face with an old man. His worn, leathery face was full of concern. "I heard you yell for help. Is everything all right?" Yeah, thanks." The man wore an odd-looking hat with fishing lures sticking out from it, a hat that Chip at first thought was a hood. The old man held a cigar, not a knife. The moonlight glinted off its cellophane wrapper. "Name's Nick Murphy," the old man barked. Chip shook his outstretched hand, surprised by the old guy's incredibly strong grip. "Chip Parker," Chip said, pulling his hand back. Mr. Murphy peeled the cellophane from his cigar. "I'm your neighbor. I live alone in that house over there." Mr. Murphy gestured to the house beyond the hedge. "Mrs. Murphy died quite some time ago." Mr. Murphy pulled a large wooden match from the grimy front pocket of his red and black plaid lumberjack shirt. He flicked the match head with a gnarly fingernail, and the match burst into flame. He held it to the cigar tip and puffed vigorously, squinting at Chip the entire time. Then he flicked the match away. Chip had a brief vision of his backyard suddenly exploding, but nothing happened. "I saw you moving around back here from the upstairs bedroom window," Mr. Murphy said, "and I thought for a moment you were my grandson, Johnny." Johnny Murphy, the guy Alicia had told him about, the guy she thought had murdered Ellen with the red dragon switchblade knife. The guy she thought was one of Al's Red Dragon brothers. "I could have sworn I saw him running through your yard the other night. Saw him looking in my kitchen window, too, when I was drinking my tea. It was hard to tell, though, with that hood pulled up round his face. If it were him, and if I caught him, I'd wring that blasted neck tighter than that noose he used to hang himself." Chip's mouth gaped open. "Johnny hanged himself?" "Yep," Mr. Murphy said, with more than a small note of pleasure. "Over at the loony bin where his parents locked him up. But as usual, the boy couldn't even do that right. They found him and cut him down and took him to the hospital, where some young hotshot doctor pulled him back to life. Waste of time and money, if you ask me." Mr. Murphy puffed on his cigar, sending a blue flume of smoke into the cold night air. Then Mr. Murphy narrowed his eyes at Chip. "That weren't you, was it, in my backyard playing round trying to scare an old man?" "No, sir," Chip said firmly, but he wondered if it might have been Al. Mr. Murphy pulled off his fishing hat and ran a big rough hand through a surprisingly thick patch of snowy white hair. "Johnny wasn't a friend of yours, was he?" Mr. Murphy asked. "No, sir," Chip said, shaking his head. "Good for you," Mr. Murphy said. "That boy's a bad influence." Can't be worse than Al, Chip thought. "We just moved here from Middleton, so we don't know a lot of people yet," Chip said, trying to make conversation. Mr. Murphy's gaze moved across the desolate yard to Chip's house. His expression was a mixture of dread and revulsion. "Why in the hell did you move into that place, if you don't mind me asking?" "Well, my mom got a good price on it, and it's near the store she's renting. She's opening up a donut shop, and since my dad died..." Chip heard a loud crash from the kitchen. Both he and Mr. Murphy looked toward the sound. Chip could see the outlines of his mother and Al through the partially pulled kitchen shade, their arms slicing through the air as they gesticulated wildly. Chip turned back to Mr. Murphy and saw that the old man was giving him a sympathetic look. "Family problems?" Mr. Murphy asked casually. "Yeah," Chip said glumly. "It's kind of a weird situation with my mom and my brother." "Can't be any weirder than that last family that lived there," Mr. Murphy said with a chuckle. "So I heard," Chip said with a rueful smile. A cool breeze blew a tangle of dead weeds over his feet and away into the night. "Johnny killed the blonde-haired girl," Mr. Murphy said suddenly. Ellen, or whatever her name was. Beautiful girl. The police blamed it on the Walker boy, but I know it was that punk Johnny." Chip eyed the old man closely. Alicia believed the same thing. "How can you be so sure of that?" "That he killed that girl?" Mr. Murphy asked. Chip nodded. "I saw him do it," Mr. Murphy blurted out. "Snatched her right off the street and murdered her. Right outside my house. I saw the whole damn thing." Okay, Slashaholics, this has been chapters 26, 27, and 28 of Freddy Krueger's Tales of Terror No. 2, Fatal Games by Bruce Richards. I'm really regretting not reading Blind Date first. I wasn't fully sure what order they went in. I should have looked it up before I started this one. I didn't realize this was like a direct sequel to Blind Date. I thought it was more like the David Bergantino set of books, part 3, 4, 5, and 6, where maybe a character from the past book pops up, but no really big plot lines cross over. So I do really apologize for that. I've been guessing the mom might end up being Freddy, but she finally showed up. We're 130 pages into a 184-page book, and the mom finally showed up. So I guess she's not the one that's going to be possessed by Freddy. At least I don't see it now. I don't want to say Al because it seems too obvious. So I really don't know. I really cannot put my finger on it. We're going to have to wait and see. This is my first time reading it too. not a whole lot happened here, other than a jealous brother. I feel like it's a bait and switch. It's a red herring. We're supposed to think Al has turned evil, but really he's just jealous and envious of Chip. It's gonna be fun to see what happens with Chip at school. If these rumors continue to grow and get bigger, if somebody else gets hurt or killed, and the finger gets pointed at Chip, will he be able to be the quarterback, or is Al gonna sabotage him? And what's up with this mysterious Mr. Murphy? That guy's, yeah, I mean, he's mad about his grandson being an evil son of a bitch, but I mean, I don't know. Something's going on with that guy. I'm curious if he was in the first book. So many suspects, not much book left, probably 2 uploads left before we finish this one. What do you guys think? Who do you think is possessed by Freddy, from what you've heard so far? I'll be back soon with more of this book, and whenever I finish this one, I'm going to alternate between Final Destination, Destination Zero, and a fan novel called Freddy vs. Ash. I think that's going to be a lot of fun. And after those two, I'll finish the Freddy Krueger's Tales of Terror series by narrating the first book in the series, Blind Date. It's funny, I narrated the last book in the series, Part 6, first, and I'll be narrating Part 1 last. So, I guess it kind of works out. Until next time, this has been your friendly neighborhood 80s slasher librarian saying thanks for listening, be excellent to each other, and I'll see you soon.